Something happened to me 5 years ago that changed my photography forever. Back then, the photography style I was indoctrinated into was fine art landscape photography, which I know sounds super pretentious, but it's basically the style where you get out on location a couple hours before sunrise, you scout, you commit to your angle, you fire off 1,000 photos while the sunrise is happening, and then when you get back to the computer, you pick the one that had the best light, and that's the one that you edit. That's the one that you roll with. Using this process, I made what I thought at the time were some pretty decent images, but over time, I started to resent the process. I hated scrolling through thousands of images that all looked the same, I hated the endless editing, and my love of photography was dying. That is, until I started shooting film, where the process was completely the opposite of what I had been doing. Film reignited my passion for photography, and I've been a die-hard film shooter ever since. Then recently I stumbled upon this video from this guy named Jesse titled "Film Doesn't Make an Image Special," and in it he makes the claim that
film doesn't make an image special.
And I was like, I don't know if I agree with that. So in this video, I'm gonna address the main issue I have with Jesse's video, show you some side-by-side comparisons of my digital and film photos to illustrate my points, and finally answer the big question, will film make my images better? And if not, why do so many people shoot it? So the fundamental premise of Jesse's video is obviously that film is not special, and the example that he uses to illustrate his point is a side-by-side comparison of the same shot that he captured on both digital and film way back when. So we're gonna do our own side-by-side and draw our own conclusions. All right, so I've got two images right here that are shot on digital and film respectively. So this one is the digital image, this is the film image. Both of these images are edited. Now with this film image, I shot this on my Mamiya 7 on Portra 400. I didn't really have to do too much to this image to give it that look. It kind of already looked that way. All I really did was tweak the contrast and the exposure just a tiny bit, and that was it. We were off to the races. Now, this shot was shot on a Sony a6300. The raw file looks very, very different. So this is what that looked like straight out of the camera. You can see I obviously exposed for the background here. The foreground is very much in the shadows, very much on the left side of this histogram, which is kind of how this image was shot too. You can see over here, I did quite a bit of work to try and get it to look like the film shot. You can make them look very similar. Although I will say, there are some color balance issues that I have not been able to troubleshoot with the digital image it's like, the way that the hues of blue, right? Like such a nice blue, but also got a little bit of purple here, and just the gradient between the orangish and the yellow here versus here. It's more of like a kind of brownish yellow. The orange isn't quite so vibrant. The separation of pastel hues isn't really there. And then of course, on the film image, these greens are they're almost a little bit cyan. They're a little bit blue. Now on the digital image, I've actually cranked the hue for the greens all the way over to cyan, because you can see the digital image actually captured pretty much kind of like a brownish yellow. So I cranked those all the way over here, and saturation's obviously not quite right, but you can see that even just the color tone is not quite right. So I would have to actually go in and manually manipulate more specifically the color of these greens if I were gonna try and get this look out of this camera. Film images almost always have a very kind of like aesthetically pleasing starting point, which I think is why many people shoot it. The digital image, it has tons of flexibility, right? Like this is all the changes that I made to this image, and it didn't break. It still looks decent. I could take this image in a completely different direction. The style, it is style agnostic. I could make it look like a film image. I could make it look super clean and polished and commercial. I could do any number of things with it. Different tools, different things. So this is a film image I shot in Washington on my Contax T2. This is unedited. This is an image I shot on the Fujifilm X-T5, same day, relatively same time frame, also unedited. Now you can really see what I mean by the starting point, right? So straight out of camera, this looks pretty decent. Obviously my horizon isn't level and the colors are a little bit muted, but I don't really think that I would want to do too much to this. I would probably, I would level the horizon. I would maybe play with the saturation and the contrast just a little bit, but Other than that, I'd be happy. This image is shot on a much more modern camera. I mean, this is an SLR. This is the Fujifilm X-T5. This is like a $2,200 brand new camera package. Much better sharpness. There's a lot more detail going on in here. But this image, it doesn't really have the same starting point, which is a good thing because you have so much flexibility. You can do any number of things with this image if you really want to. But it really just kind of depends on your process and what you're going for. You could probably say that this Fujifilm image is better, and I mean the composition's just better in general. Much better sharpness, better color fidelity, lots more flexibility here. So let's take a look at another image. These are also unedited. This is also from my Contax T2 on Portra 400. This is a straight out of camera JPEG from the Fujifilm X-T5. More at sunset than this one. This was golden hour. Similar, but different. Can't do a direct comparison of this one so easily as we could the others, but that's okay. This film image, I think it looks pretty good. Highlight roll off is smooth, but definitely a little bit overexposed over here. The colors are very muted, very desaturated. So I think what I would end up doing is I would probably end up adding just a little bit of contrast and then adding a little bit of color, which is funny because that is the opposite of what I would do on this image. This image, because it's a higher contrast scene and the colors are already looking very rich, I would probably pull those down just a little bit. And so the point that I'm making here is that neither of these are better than the other. They both just give you different starting points and different levels of flexibility.
What I figured out in this moment was super important for me. It was a realization that what didn't matter was the camera or the medium or the brand. But what really matters is the photographer's approach, eye, the creative intent. And I discovered that film and digital are not mutually exclusive. It doesn't have to be a binary choice.
So I think Jesse and I are essentially saying the same thing. I agree with him. We're basically saying that film does not inherently make an image better. But that's not what he said. What he said was, film doesn't make an image special. Now, before we go any further, little disclaimer, I have absolutely nothing personal against Jesse. I actually think he made an excellent video. Like I said, I agree with most of what he had to say. I'm not trying to attack him or his ideas. But when I saw the video, I did feel compelled to respectfully chime in and share my perspective to add to the conversation. So, Jesse, if you're watching this, no hard feelings, dude. Okay, so in Jesse's video, he focuses almost entirely on the quality and detail of the final image. But he hardly mentions something that I think many of us would agree is just as, if not more, important: the process of shooting and how that differs between film and digital. I shoot a lot of film now, and my shots are decent, but you could argue that my fine art landscape photos from way back when are better. They're more universally appealing, they're more polished, they're more commercially friendly, and they're less raw feeling. But the process was just so rigid, so results oriented, and it was getting less and less fun. Now, I'm not sure how old Jesse is, but I think he's a father. Perhaps he's from an older generation than I am, and maybe he grew up with film. I was born in 1994, and as someone who grew up when I did, my relationship with technology was interesting. The world was fully entering the digital era, technology was improving at a staggering rate, and there was this underlying assumption that we were kind of indoctrinated into that newer was better. During our formative years, my peers and I just had new technology thrust upon us constantly, and we were repeatedly told how great the new stuff was. But with this assumption that newer is better came this inherent belief that what's older is no longer of value. Cassettes yielded to CDs, which yielded to LimeWire, which yielded to Spotify, and as time passed, the ways that we interacted with art in our lives became less and less tangible, which I think is why we've seen such a dramatic resurgence in analog mediums of all kinds over the last decade. There's something inherently human about physically interacting with what you're consuming or creating. You get to hold the record, drop the needle on the wax, load the film, crank the advance lever. Now, sure, I can listen to an infinite amount of music on Spotify or shoot an infinite amount of photos on the latest mirrorless camera with incredible dynamic range and AI autofocus. And yeah, you can probably say that those things are objectively better. But I crave a tangible connection to the art in my life, and I will take the liberty of speaking for my generation in saying that sometimes it feels like we were denied that. The new tech is great, I'm not some hermit who just listens to records and only shoots photos on a pinhole camera. I stream music, I shoot digital cameras, I use ChatGPT, and I shoot photos on an iPhone. I could shoot 1,000 photos on my iPhone this afternoon. But when I'm shooting film, I only get 36 shots on a roll, and depending on the camera I'm using, even less. That means that I have to be selective with what I shoot, which means I'm more intentional with my shots. There's no computer screen directly between me and what I'm shooting that shows me exactly how what I'm pointing the camera at is going to look when I press the shutter button, so I actually have to be thoughtful and deliberate about my exposure. So when I capture those images, it doesn't just feel like a photo I took. It feels more like something I created with my own two hands and my eyes, and of course, the tool at my disposal. And because of the presence I had when I was capturing it, the process of shooting it, the careful deliberation to not waste my frame, because if I'm going to spend money on this, I want to make sure it's of something I care about or it's actually going to be good. Because of all of those reasons and many others, those images are special to me. Not better, but special. Precious. I cherish my mediocre film images more than my best digital images. And I'm not really sure why, but I think it's because they feel like moments of my life that I actually interacted with to create something tangible. It's not just something I pointed and pressed a button at. There's a resounding sentiment between film photographers that I know and just my friends who casually shoot film, and it's that their film images, they feel a deeper connection to them for some reason. I can't say why that is, but my hypothesis is that film is so easy to connect to because it's naturally imperfect, because it's not inherently better than digital, because it's finite and it's fleeting, like life itself.
That's life. That's life. That's what all the people say. You're riding high in April, shot down in May. But I know I'm gonna change that tune when I'm back on top in June. I said that's life.
I have a lot more fun with my photography when I'm shooting film photos. I just grab the camera and it feels like an adventure. And when I was getting into photography as a kid, that's what set me on fire. Just wandering around my neighborhood, shooting random photos with no particular goal in mind. But you know how the story goes. Somewhere along the line, judgment came in, and playful discovery and experimentation was no longer enough. I wanted to make things that were good, that would show people how talented I was. And I got obsessed with this idea of better. And that's what set me on the path of fine art landscape rigidity that I had to detox from a few years later. Now, a lot of learning and improvement came from that path. I've talked about this before. I will not change anything about how I got here. But I think there's value in remembering why we started taking photos to begin with, and in reflecting on what part of the process do you actually enjoy the most. Is it cranking sliders in Lightroom trying to find or manufacture perfection? Is it the feeling of observing and capturing? Or is it something else entirely? Photography is not what anybody tells you it needs to be. It doesn't need to be about shooting the best photo. And it doesn't need to be about enjoying the process either. People like Jesse and I are just sharing our opinions. Please take them with a grain of salt. I don't think people like myself on the internet have the intention to paint things in black and white or tell you how you should do things or prescribe our worldviews upon you. I think we have good intentions to just honestly and candidly share, but sometimes these things can become unspoken rules or myths or expectations, and as a beginner, as anyone navigating the path, it can become difficult to know where the line is for you. And the rabbit hole just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Like, you know, when you show somebody a photo that you're really proud of and they say, "Oh, wow, you must have a great camera. Did you edit that?" And basically what they're saying is, I'm okay giving your camera all the credit, but if you actually manipulated this image, that's dishonest. It's frustrating, I know. And this idea and the subsequent interactions that stem from it is rooted in one of the most fundamental misconceptions in photography. If you want to learn the truth behind one of photography's biggest myths, just how dishonest editing your photos really is, and why we started to fabricate images in the first place, Check out this video right here.